Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn, and I'm thrilled to have with me today Steve Glaveski. Steve is the author of the new book, Time Rich. He is a podcaster, entrepreneur, focused on the world of innovation, founder of Collective Campus and No Filter Media. So he's a very busy guy, and I'm very happy he's made some time for us today. Steve, it's wonderful having you here.
Nick, it's an absolute pleasure to be on the program.
Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode.
So Steve, for people who don't know about you and your background, especially when it comes to innovation, could you just give us a brief look back on your journey as to how you got here?
Yeah, sure. So, like many of us, I went down the typical line of going to university, getting the degree, and then climbing the corporate ladder. That was essentially the definition of success that I was sold growing up. And so that's what I pursued. But after almost a decade of working for large consultancies, I kind of found myself feeling somewhat diminished. I use the term miserably comfortable in my previous book, Employer to Entrepreneur, and that forced me to jump out with a parachute of sorts, because I did have the fallback plan of going back to the corporate world if things didn't work out, and pursue entrepreneurship. And that took me first to a failure with a web startup called Hotdesk, which was essentially like an Airbnb for office space. And then that led me to found Collective Campus almost 6 years ago now, which is essentially a corporate innovation and startup accelerator that exists to unlock the latent potential of people at companies around the world to create more impact and lead more fulfilling lives. And we've incubated over 100 startups in the past 5.5 years. We've also worked with about 50 big brands around the world, including the likes of Lufthansa, Village Roadshow, Microsoft, Clifford Chance, you name it, all sorts of industries. We've worked with them, and it's been a lot more fun than what I was having previously. So I'm keen to talk about what I've learned today.
Absolutely. It sounds like you've got a lot of clients you're juggling simultaneously. That must take a large toll on your time management ability. And is that sort of how you came to this concept of the Time Rich book?
Yeah. You would think that it would take a massive toll on your time rich ability, and the Time Rich book that you allude to is coming out next month through Wiley. And the book was inspired initially by an article I wrote for Harvard Business Review called The Case for the 6-Hour Workday, which went viral when it came out about 1.5 years ago. And that article was based on an experiment that we ran at Collective Campus. For so long in the corporate world, I used to work, say, 8:30 a.m. till about 7:30, 8 p.m., sometimes even up till 9 or 10 p.m. And then when I founded my own company, I found myself doing the same thing. So, we built our team up to, it was about close to a dozen people at the time. And I felt like I needed to set a quote unquote positive example. And I would be at my desk until about 7 p.m. and get home at about 8 p.m. most nights while I was working at Collective Campus. This is during the first 2 or 3 years of our sort of lifespan. And then as an Aussie, I enjoy surfing, but getting home at 8 p.m., the sun was already down. By the time I got home, there was absolutely nothing left for me to do other than park myself on the couch and maybe pick up a book, or if I was not feeling up to that, watch some Netflix. And it was taking a toll on my personal life, relationships, interests. But when I actually sat down to reflect on why I was doing this, it was really just anchoring to the past. Most days by 2 or 3 p.m., I was pretty much done. Like, I'd done my high level thinking. I was spending 3 or 4 hours in the flow state in the morning. And then after 3 p.m., I got literally nothing done. I was past the point of diminishing returns, but for whatever reason, I felt compelled to stay back until 7 p.m. So 2 years ago, I decided, well, let's try this whole 6-hour workday concept. And I think I was buoyed on by Adam Grant, who posted something about a 6-hour day on LinkedIn at the time. And I said, let's just try this. And so we ran this 2-week experiment. which acted as a forcing function. You know, Parkinson's law: give yourself 2 weeks to do something, you do it in 2 weeks. Give yourself 2 years, you'll do it in 2 years. And so the 6-hour workday experiment basically forced us to focus on high-level things rather than shallow-level work, rather than, you know, excessive meetings and whatnot. It forced us to automate and outsource all the rudimentary stuff. And what we found after the 2 weeks was we were as, if not more productive than we were previously. And people were all reporting that they were feeling, you know, emotionally a lot better. They had more time to spend with their kids, with their friends, on their personal interests, more time to recharge and rejuvenate. And I think paradoxically, when you spend less time at work, you get more high value work done. And over the long term, you end up in a much better place than you would if you were just burning the midnight oil every single day.
There's this, there's a lot of truth in what you talked about, being anchored to the past. I also had a similar experience sort of coming from management consulting where the hours can be very long. And then coming into a different setting where, you, as you say, the work can be done by the early afternoon. And then the question is, how do you appear not to be lazy or ungrateful or all of these negative connotations that come with actually, ironically, being productive and having the work already finished? What do you think is the reason why so many people struggle to feel okay with getting work done more effectively and faster?
Well, in many cases, people have things that are in their control, and then things that aren't in their control. So you mentioned management consulting. In your typical large management consulting firm, you will be invited to numerous meetings every day, and you would be expected to accept all of those meeting invites. And if you declined, well, why did you decline? Why are you rejecting my meeting invite? Clearly, I invited you because I think you could contribute something. So many organizations have what I call a C.R.A.P culture. So C.R.A.P, essentially an acronym, which stands for consensus seeking, hyper responsiveness, hyper availability, and process paralysis. So rather than empowering people to make decisions, rather than treating inconsequential reversible decisions as exactly that, we treat all of our decisions as highly consequential and irreversible. And this is something that Jeff Bezos alludes to in his 1997 shareholder letter to Amazon shareholders, type 1 and type 2 decisions. But when you treat all of your decisions like they're super consequential, that means that you have a lot of meetings. You're always looping in people. You're picking up the phone. You're emailing people to ask for input and advice. And that just creates a massive sort of paper trail. It also means that we tend to have delegations of authority at many organizations that are quite high up. So any decision to, say, deploy $1,000 worth of capital or any slightly politically sensitive decision needs to go before a committee. And so that just slows down decision-making. And it also means that you spend a lot of time pushing paper around and sitting in meetings as opposed to getting work done. The hyper-responsiveness piece, your typical employee gets interrupted 50 to 60 times a day. Every interruption effectively can take us out of the flow state for up to 23 minutes. And when we're in that flow state, you know, that place where we're completely immersed in the task at hand, the rest of the world sees us to be, McKinsey found we're up to 5 times more productive in that place. But if I'm checking email 72 times a day, like a typical executive does, if I'm receiving more than 46 notifications on my phone and on my desktop, if I'm being interrupted 50 to 60 times a day and then being pulled into all sorts of meetings, clearly I'm spending no time in the flow state at all, which is the optimal human condition. I'm spending all my time in shallow level tasks, just fighting fires. And as a byproduct of that, it's very easy for us to be quote unquote busy, spend 10, 12 hours at our desks doing quote unquote work, but at the end of the week, having very little to show for it in terms of moving closer to our goals, but just feeling absolutely exhausted. So that whole concept of, you know, the C.R.A.P company, like what is the opposite of that? And that is essentially what we need to be cultivating more of to give our people the freedom to actually think. Because if I hire you, Nicholas, to work for my company, it's not because I want a bum on a seat. It's because I'm hiring you because I believe you can think critically, you can solve problems, you can contribute, you can create value. But if I take that away from you by forcing you to attend all sorts of meetings and not giving you the power to make decisions and take action, then you're effectively rendered, you know, useless in a way. And that might work now when companies have existing business models, revenue from legacy deals coming through. But over time, as the need to innovate, to adapt to the changing circumstances gets bigger and bigger, if you're stuck in that type of environment, your ability to adapt suffers big time. And over time, you'll be left with people who perhaps aren't the best people on the bus. Because if you are someone who is an A player, who wants to make decisions, who wants to get stuff done, you're going to move on from such a company and find an organization that empowers you to actually put your DNA in the company's genomic sequence, essentially.
I see a lot of what you're talking about in large companies where there is a lot of consensus required. There are a lot of meetings. And a lot of people think that the young, scrappy upstarts from Silicon Valley or Berlin or London or Tel Aviv, they're the ones who are really innovating. But I want to get your perspective on something which I see as being quite dangerous in that area, and that's this hustle culture. This, you need to be sticking every waking moment into being productive and taking less time for meals and biohacking, so you need as little sleep as possible. And there's a lot of negative role models I see on social media who are showing how busy you can be if you just put your mind to it.
Yeah.
What's your view on whether or not that's actually the way to innovate, or can you also be innovative while also having something like a 6-hour workday?
Yeah, no, you definitely can be innovative while having something like a 6-hour workday. Like the question that I'm often asked is, can you get to, say, extreme success with a balanced life? And, you know, there's numerous examples of that. You look at Charles Darwin. I mean, he came up with one of the most foundational concepts in all of science, and he worked 5 hours a day. And that included 1 hour for lunch. In the music domain, the Berlin Conservatory of Music, where I understand you're in Berlin at the moment, Nick, they have produced world-class violinists and all sorts of musicians. And they typically partake in 4 hours of deliberate practice a day because they know that anything beyond that, the point of diminishing returns is hit, and anything beyond that will just not register the same way as the 4 hours of training. Similarly, a study was done in the 80s using scientists, where they found that scientists who worked 20 hours a week were twice as productive as their 35-hour-a-week peers. And there was a third group in this study who worked 60 hours a week, who were least productive of all, because they were basically burnt out. I mean, they were physically turning up, but like a house that's been ravaged by a fire, the exterior is still standing, but there's nothing on the inside. It's been burnt to a crisp, which is effectively the definition of being burnt out. And then in the startup world, I mean, there are examples of companies like, say, Basecamp, founded by Jason Fried and David Hannemeyer Hansen, and they've been on the warpath about this particular topic for years. You know, they've worked on average 40 hours a week since founding that company. It's a private company, but estimates suggest that they're pulling in something between $60 and $70 million a year. And ultimately, when you focus on high value activities, when you do away with all the rudimentary stuff, when you do away with all the outsourcing accountability, you find yourself spending 4 or 5 hours of quality time into high level cognition. Then you can go away, you can recharge, you can go for a surf, do whatever it is you like to do, and come back, you know, rejuvenated the next day. And you're absolutely right. There are so many negative personalities on social media pounding their chests and saying we need to be hustling and working 14-hour days. But at what cost? And also, whenever you're, and the same holds true for me. Like, if you are taking advice from anyone, like, where is that advice coming from? And I think a lot of that hustle culture comes from people who perhaps derive a great sense of identity from that culture. Like, that is their entire identity is wrapped up in it. And for them, it's worked, but at what cost? Like, we don't know what the cost is to every other aspect of their life. And that's something that people need to be conscious of. Like this morning, I spoke with John Roller on my podcast, Future Squared. And John built a design and basically an innovation agency, technology agency. And he, over the period of 5 years, built it from zero to some undisclosed sum. They were effectively sold to Salesforce. And he wrote a book called Get Rich and Die Trying. And during that 5-year period, he did the whole hustle thing. There was sex, there was drugs, there was parties, and he ended up having a psychotic episode where he completely forgot everyone. He didn't even know who he was for a period of 3 days. He suffered a bout of amnesia, which forced him to sell his company. So upon reflection, we basically landed on the same page as what I'm proposing in my book, Time Rich, and what Jason Fried and David talk about at Basecamp, which is, you don't need to work those crazy hours to get stuff done, to innovate. It's not about more hours, it's about quality hours. So 4 hours of deep work is better than 12 hours of shallow work any day of the week.
So one tip seems to be focusing on the right type of work. Another tip that I know you talk about in your book is something called asynchronous communication. What is that? What's the concept behind it?
Sure. So effectively, if getting the best out of people is about giving them time to think and focus and spend more time in that deep work/flow state, we need to make sure that we do away with constant interruption. And one way to do that is by moving away from real-time communication. So you think about our current organization, real-time communication is IMs on Slack that I'm expected to respond to quite quickly, phone calls, taps on the shoulder if I'm working in an office, and then emails, again, that I'm expected to respond to relatively quickly. Now, asynchronous communication doesn't assume that we're all online between 9 and 5. It assumes that we are working hours that suit us. We can design our days around it. But it gives me the power to say, carve out 2 or 3 hours in the morning or in the afternoon to get into that flow state. There still needs to be some kind of overlap between me and my team and someone that, is in my value chain of work, but it doesn't need to be 8 hours overlap. It could be 1 hour overlap, and that's enough to effectively pass the baton. You look at companies like Automatic, who founded WordPress, which powers 30% of the internet, 1,200 employees, 75 countries, no office, completely asynchronous. But to get that type of asynchronous culture to work, you ultimately need people who can write effectively and be articulate, because it's not about speaking, it's not about a Zoom call, it's about messages that will be received maybe 2 or 3 hours from now and responded to maybe tomorrow. The good thing about asynchronous companies as well, beyond giving people time to actually think and do their best work, is that 40% of people are actually night owls. So they have preferred sleeping patterns that are programmed at birth, otherwise known as chronotypes, which means that for pretty much half the workforce, if you get them to start work at 9 in the morning, they suffer a type of social jet lag. They're actually a lot more productive about 10 hours after waking up than early birds. So this asynchronous communication gives people the opportunity to design their days around how they best work, rather than putting everyone on this 9 to 5 page, which really is a throwback to the Industrial Revolution, where we all had to be on the assembly line, in a coal mine, in a wheat field, whatever the case was, at the same time to get work done. But nowadays, it's cognitive work. We don't need to be in the same place at the same time to get stuff done. We need to be smarter about how we go about creating value.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. Steve, we're coming up to the end of the podcast. I just wanted to get your perspective as a parting thought. There's a lot of concepts we've talked about today, being able to focus on the right type of work, blocking out time for flow, asynchronous communication. Can you give us one insight as to how someone could get started? Let's say they're working in a company and have a team. What's one thing that they can change quite quickly to really bring a lot of benefit?
Sure. So I think as human beings, we're all predisposed to taking the path of least effort, because that helps us to conserve energy. And that goes back to our, evolutionary roots, where we were, say, running around on the African savannah, trying to evade predators, trying to hunt out prey. And in those environments, you needed to conserve energy because you wouldn't know when your next meal would become available. And you could go days without any form of sustenance. But we still have this programming. It's innate in us. So when I sit down at my desk in the morning, it's so easy for me to just jump onto Twitter, jump onto LinkedIn, check my email, get to inbox 0, which is really just an indication that I'm great at responding to other people's demands on my time rather than focusing on my own priorities. What I would challenge people to do is, when you sit down to your desk in the morning, just cultivating, doing away with distractions, putting your phone away, and getting into the habit of maybe spending the first hour of your day on a high value activity. Might be difficult, but the more valuable something is, the more difficult it tends to be. and just getting into the habit of doing that without checking your phone, without checking your email, without checking social media, and the compounding benefits of being able to channel the flow state and get into that space of deep focus over time, the benefits of that are exponentially greater than the input in the first place. So just getting better at using momentum. And the one thing I will say on that is, if I'm staring at a blank page and I need to write a 1,500-word article, man, that sounds so daunting. But if I commit to writing 50 words, doesn't matter how bad or good those words are, it's so much easier to keep going, which ties into Isaac Newton's laws of motion. An object in motion stays in motion. So whenever you find yourself procrastinating, identify what's the smallest possible step you can take. Take that step and you'll find taking step 2, 3, and 4 becomes so much easier.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Steve, it's been wonderful speaking with you. I think the book should be out by now. If people want to find out more about the book, your work, what's the best place they can go to find out more?
Sure. No, it's been an absolute pleasure, Nick. People can find the book over at timerichbook.com. They can also download the first chapter for free there. And I've also put together I think it's about a 30-page PDF with all sorts of time-rich automation tools that people can use to help them automate their sales, their marketing, their customer service, all sorts of stuff to give them more time back. And if they want to find out a little bit more about me, my other work, connect with me on social media. Steve Glaveski, GLAVESKI.com is the best place to do that.
Perfect. I'll make sure to get all of those links down in the description below. Steve, it's been wonderful speaking with you, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they are backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.